Hey guys, welcome to the Bionicle Inspiration Series, the series where we showcase mocks from the community to help inspire you to be the best builder you can be. Today, this episode, we're going to be talking a little bit about torso designs. Again, this is an episode we've done in the past, but I've had a few requests for it, so let's do number 2. May as well just start right off with the first mock, which is Ouyrei, the Psychic Knight by Mr. Boltron. May have got that name wrong, my apologies. So, first off, awesome color scheme. Nothing beats purple. One of the best colors to use in Bionicle, in my opinion. Also really complemented by the gold there. The two colors work quite well together. Something that I really wanted to talk about with this torso is this is sort of a bit of a sort of super detailed looking torso, and it actually allows for some really awesome shaping. There's a whole bunch of the Exoforce or Hydraxon fingers, whatever you want to call them, used there on the torso to kind of get this sort of muscular toned definition, and kind of combining that with some of the different Bionicle G2 parts there and a few other pieces really creates a very well-shaped torso, but well-shaped as well as sort of nicely detailed. There's a lot of nice little greebles in there, even using some of these flower pieces and some studs and stuff. He's able to achieve what looks really awesome and is quite greebled, but also has a nice sort of smoothness to it. And I think that's a really cool idea, is to sort of get a general basic shape, similar to how this is, and then shove a whole bunch of stuff on it. Now, often by just shoving heaps of things onto something, you can create a very busy, disorganized design. And where I think this really excels is that there isn't a limit, and it's hard to explain in my opinion. Like whenever I'm building and I start shoving stuff on, and eventually I kind of realize like maybe there's too much. There's no like formula to that. It's literally just judging it by eye. I mean, it's always a good idea to grab a friend's opinion or something and say like, hey, is there a little too much on this? I don't know if it's too busy or whatever. And I feel like the more you kind of play with that, the more you'll kind of learn where that quote unquote boundary is. But I think this mock works really well because there's not too much used, but there's a decent amount used, and it's very smooth and not distracting in any way. Everything sort of flows nicely together and doesn't nothing stands out, you know? Something I also really like is how a lot of that torso sort of flows down into the waist there, as well as other parts on the mock. Like a lot of these greebles and things, there's also some of that on the foot, and little bits of it on the leg, and all sorts of stuff like that. And sort of seeing that sort of consistency throughout the mock really helps to kind of balance it out. For example, if just the torso was that kind of hyper detail look, and the rest of the mock was super smooth and just Hero Factory joints or whatever, they may not really flow that well together. They'd probably contrast a lot. But given that that's sort of a very consistent thing throughout this, and then is coupled very nicely with other sort of smoother textures, and everything's just balanced out, it all works very, very well. But going back to that waist design there, really awesome how it sort of flows into a sort of nice looking dress design. It doesn't look too... It doesn't look out of place. Everything looks really... Everything just flows nicely together. It looks like actual armor would. And often I find it's very difficult to pull off this sort of waistcoat design that this mock has here. Just often it can just look kind of awkward or just not quite flow nicely, which is often really hard to achieve unless you're using like a cloth element or something. But I think he's done a fantastic job here, and I think that simply just comes down to repeating the same sort of textures and pieces and stuff, and that just helps everything flow nicely. And also adding the two little G2 parts there on the side to sort of complement the longer sort of cloth down the front there really helps balance things out. And there's definitely a lot of sense of balance and kind of like unity in a sense with this mock, and I really like that. So I think that's definitely something to try with a torso design, is yeah, just getting a really basic shape. You don't need to overcomplicate it, and then just shove a whole bunch of stuff on it. In all honesty, like, who cares, man? Just you do you. Awesome head design on this, by the way. I know we're talking about torsos, but definitely want to talk about that. It's a really cool head design. Often, again, I've said this 1,000 times, I'm sure, but using system is awesome to really achieve sort of little smaller details you may not be able to with a Bionicle mask. So I think that's an awesome head design and a great example of what system can do. Also, very cool stuff. Again, uses system, looks fantastic. So yeah, I think that's about it for Mr. Boltron. Let's move on to the next mock, which is Seysiris, the Void Traveler by Diego Corridera. Really, really like this mock. This mock looks fantastic. I think there's a really, again, a very nice sense of consistent flow throughout the mock of all the textures being very unified. Again, there's also little like twinkles or twinkles. There's little twinkles throughout the mock. Little what is the word I'm thinking of? I don't know. There's little sprinkles. Sprinkles. Is it? I'm just saying fairy words. I don't even know what I'm saying, guys. But look, there's little hints of greebles and stuff like on the knees and sort of some of the textures on the upper leg there. Really kind of creates a nice accent point. If the whole mock itself was just smooth, it could look cool. but adding little accent points like that really adds some nice definition, and I think complements the little highlights of orange quite nicely. It gives a sort of robotic mecha suit kind of vibe, and that's really awesome. Something that really stood out for me with this mock, which I have no idea whether or not it was deliberate or was actually his process or not, but I think it's worth noting, is that this torso design here, using one of the Hero Factory hand pieces there, kind of reminds me very much of Shadow Gear's self-mock Minion. It has a very sort of similar torso design in that regard. And I think that's really cool, because if you look at the two torso designs, here the two of them are together, so we not have to sort of jump back and forth. Here with the two of them together, there's similar aspects, but they're not the exact same torso design. And I think it's really cool, and whether or not Mr. Seysiris... I'm sorry, I'm probably pronouncing your name wrong. Oh no, wait, that's the mock's name. Whether or not Diego deliberately did or didn't do, was or wasn't inspired by Shadow Gear's design is obviously, I don't know. But I think it's worth noting that there's really awesome ways you can take inspiration from another mock without having to necessarily blatantly steal it. And I'm not against, I'm going to need to clarify this, but I'm not exactly against blatantly stealing in terms of what you can learn from it. Don't just be like, oh, this was me, I built this, I made it, it's totally mine, I didn't steal anything. Because that's kind of rude. But definitely build something and learn from it. See how they worked that design and how you can apply it to yourself. And I think this is a great example of that, if that's how he did it. Is taking major inspiration from something, taking sort of 1 or 2 points, and then tweaking it, moving it around. Like, for example, this sort of Throwbot head there. On Shadow Gear's Minion, it's on the front there, but then he sort of moved that onto the side and sort of continue that down on the lower legs and upper legs, sorry, and all that. And I think that's really cool. Is taking a concept and sort of toying around with it, playing with it in different ways, taking 1 or 2 aspects from it. It's kind of a nice way to see what you learnt from it, as well as just apply it to your own methods. And I think that's really, really cool. Also, something that I think's worth noting with this, doesn't necessarily just refer to the torso design, but Mr. Diego has a link on his page, which I'll also include in the description, of a drawing that he made of this mock. And it looks fantastic, the drawing. And I think that's really cool, is to either A, base a mock off a drawing, or even build a mock and then make a drawing out of that. You know, obviously this show is just about Lego, but there's no reason you can't also have other art forms. And I'm sure a lot of the sort of methods that I talk about in some way can apply to painting and other forms of art. Yeah, I think that's really cool. Is, you know, if you are a drawer or a painter, or you have some other art medium, yeah, maybe you write songs or you dance or something. Maybe you can have a song or a dance that somehow relates to your mock. I don't know. Figure it out. Maybe you can. So I think that's really cool and a great way to continue to be a bit more creative. So that's awesome. Final mock we have today is Kanohi Test Automaton by Alex Burtons. I think this is a fantastic mock. A very awesome, sleek, yet simple design. Uses a lot of system, but I think that's a really good thing. Because if you look at the torso design here, a lot of that waste isn't a lot of pieces. It's all just sort of one Technic rod with, you know, a couple like wheels and other system parts all sort of put together there. But it creates a very effective and simple design. Overall, this mock isn't too bulky. It's sort of quite slim. Also has a heck of a lot of posability and can pull off a lot of different poses and has really cool looking, you know, kind of personality to itself because there's so many photos of it doing all sorts of crazy things. It's awesome. And I think that's awesome, is to build a mock that has super large amounts of posability. And often I find the best way to do that is to build more sort of simplistic mocks. I myself have built a whole bunch of mocks that, you know, use a whole bunch of different pieces on, you know, one specific joint of the mock. And then I can barely pose it because, you know, if I move it slightly, half of that falls off, or there's just so much there that it's really delicate and you're kind of like, I just don't want to touch this. So I think doing that, having very simplistic bare bone mocks that don't use a lot of pieces but still look fantastic like this mock is a very good idea. And that said, you don't just have to have the whole thing be simple. Like those legs there's a lot going on there. And it looks great. Another thing that's awesome about this is the torso design uses some mixel joints there for the sort of shoulder connection. And that's awesome. I think that's really genius to do that because mixel joints are really, really sturdy. It's another joint form. You know, people sometimes complain like, I don't have any ball joints. How am I going to build this mock? Well, mixel joints, man. Like, give it a go. See what you can do. And I think it flows very nicely with the system in this mock and blends well with the other Bionicle aspects of it. So that's awesome. So this mock does actually have a bit of a backstory that sort of seems to relate to the larger Bionicle universe, but it's also cool just to build a mock just to simply test posability or test out some masks, which is what I originally thought this mock was. So I think that's really cool to kind of, yeah, just sort of play around with stuff. Also cool to see the original Mutter head there used very well on a mock and flows very well with everything else on it, because, I mean, most of the time you just shove a mask on that, right? But it looks fantastic. And that essentially does it for today. So thank you very much for watching. If you have any questions or mocks that you would like to see in a future episode, or you want to request a future theme, maybe there's a theme I've done in the past that you'd love to see a second time, much like this episode, let me know, and I'll make an episode on it. So best way to let me know is to look in the description for links to my social media, where you can drop me a message, or just say in the comments below. That works fine as well. Also, check the links in the description for the mocks that you saw in today's episode. Be sure to check out the other mocks that those guys have made, and check out a few of the other photos of these mocks that I may not have included. Definitely some really cool stuff to check out there, so be sure to do it. That about does it, I think. Yeah. Awesome. Sweet. Get building. Build me some torso designs. Yeah! See you guys.